learning. Um, sorry. So yeah, basically, we are designing a pre-survey evaluation for BCU first-year medical students and faculty to hand them over for whoever are intending for this pilot for the summer. So nice to meet you all.
Great, thank you. Okay, and it's presentation season, so we've had a lot of accepted presentations lately. So Sajani, Gus, Michelle, AB, and Dr. Martin had 3 different poster acceptances. And we also had Rachel, Shreya, and Catherine, who all got poster acceptances, which is so awesome. And Dr. Martin got not 1, not 2, but 3 symposiums accepted for this upcoming round at SLEEP, at SASCOG, and at ASAM. And we currently have 2 manuscripts in review, and Annabeth is the first author on both of those. And we've had 6 recently accepted, or 7 manuscripts. And one of them was Annabeth's, and one of them was Andrea Nguyen, and then the others were Dr. Martin's. And then here are some screenshots of our recently accepted publications that were published. And if you want to check out some of our recent publications, you can check out our Twitter account. We tweet our publications and DOIs for our publications pretty often. And we also have a YouTube account where we post our lab meetings. So if you ever miss a lab meeting and want to catch up, or if you're just really interested and would like to learn more and have seen what we're doing and what we've been doing, give us a follow and check out our content. And so now let's talk about the ongoing projects that we have. So first, there's Project Better, which is a randomized clinical trial that Annabeth is the graduate assistant on, research assistant on. And this study provides a theoretically grounded assessment of feasibility and acceptability of a new technology-delivered educational intervention for pregnant and parenting people receiving medication for opioid use disorder. We also have Project SORT, which is an ongoing study in our lab, which investigates the relationship between sleep and opioid use disorder recovery. And Michelle is the graduate research assistant on this project. And she's been working very hard each week. We are currently at 150 participants. We also have the registry at OB Motivate, which is an ongoing study that records and tracks clinical outcomes of our pregnant and postpartum patients who seek addiction treatment with OB Motivate Clinic. And we currently have 131 participants enrolled, and Annabeth is the graduate research assistant for this. We also have the postpartum recovery study, which is not actively recruiting, but we still have chart reviews ongoing, and there are 26 participants that were recruited for this. And this study compares the biopsychosocial factors such as pain, mood, impulsivity, and maternal-infant attachment during the 3rd trimester of pregnancy and within 6 weeks postpartum between women with opioid use disorder and women without substance use disorder. And Annabeth is the graduate research assistant on this project. And our next lab meeting will be on April 27th at 5:45. And we will have Dr. Deshonda Taylor give a research teaching practice. It's going to be awesome. And also Rachel Choi will be practicing her poster presentation. So lots of exciting things coming up. And we also have VCU's 17th annual research day, Women's Research Day, where there will be poster sessions on topics such as women's health and or gender differences. And this will be on April 26th from 1 to 4:30. And a lot of our lab members have submitted posters. So if you'd like to come and support them, that would be awesome. And we also have availability for other research teaching presentations. If you're interested, please let us know. And if you have any questions or updates, feel free to email me.
Thank you, Lilia. That was exciting. We've had a lot of traction recently in this conference season. Lots of PowerPoints that I need to make. So we are excited though to be able to share our research and our findings and collaborate with others at our national meetings coming up. So we're excited for the Ivy Lab to continue to grow in that sense. If you have any questions about any of the studies or any opportunities, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lilia, like she mentioned. We are excited for things to keep moving forward. And we have some other studies that weren't even listed there. So we do have a lot of other things going on behind the scenes that are are getting more and more traction. So hopefully we'll have more things to report in the coming months, especially for new recruitments. Great. Well, now we're going to transition into our presentation for the night. So we have lovely Dr. Alison Patev, who's here with us, and she has been working with me in the lab for, gosh, it has been a while now since, in COVID time. I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but it's been a while. It's all kind of fuzzy, and we've really enjoyed collaborating with her and her expertise. She graduated in December 2021 from the health psychology program here at VCU. She has a lot of really cool research interests, focus on health attitudes, knowledge, stigma, and inequities. Her two primary areas of expertise within that realm are abortion misinformation, abortion stigma, healthcare provider bias, and health disparities in reproductive health. And that's where she has worked with us in a lot of different ways, including our current stigma-related project, which we hopefully will have some more updates for in the coming months. That has been up and going, and we're really excited to be able to hone her expertise in those areas, along with our expertises in addiction and clinical care. So we're excited to talk about that in the coming months. Currently, she is a postdoc fellow with the Center for the Study of Tobacco Products here at VCU, which is a really massive, very productive group here, and they do a lot of really cool, interesting work. If you were here with when Gus, one of the medical students that presented a little while ago, he is also with that group too. And so she's, in addition to that, she's doing some additional training in qualitative research and science communication. And she also, in addition to that, she's very busy, is an adjunct professor in the Department of Psychology here at VCU. So first of all, we're very thankful that with all of those things that she has going on, that she was able to join us tonight, and not only join us, but also prepare a talk for us tonight. And we're hoping that this will be very interesting and intriguing. And we're also, please feel free to put questions in the chat and also speak up too. I'll let her kind of guide that. And I can say that Alison's been really great at gearing things towards trainees too. So even if you have little experience or a lot of experience in clinical research, I can tell you that her perspective is quite excellent at kind of taking you to the next level. So Alison, I will let you take it over.
You're making me sound good. God.
I know. You deserve it.
I don't know. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to come and share some of the things that I know. This presentation is going to be a little bit different because this is, like, as weird as this is to say, this is not an area where I am an expert. Usually I'm here giving talks, and I generally give talks about places where like I'm an expert on it, or have a ton of expertise. And while I do have a lot of experience with qualitative research and thematic analysis, this is currently where my training is focused. So like Dr. Martin said, I am currently a postdoc at the Center for the Study of Tobacco Products, which is definitely a little bit of a shift from my work in reproductive health and provider bias, but it doesn't have to make sense, right? But this is one of the areas where my training is currently focused. So this is a little bit less of like a I'm an expert presentation, and a little bit more of like a kind of like you watching my thought process as I learn. All right. So I'm going to jump in as soon as I actually start the slideshow, with just to get us all on the same page, talking about like, what do I mean by qualitative research, setting out some terms, telling you a little bit about that. And then I'm going to go into a very specific, I tend to think of it as kind of like a qualitative data analysis method, but it's kind of a method design guide and a data analysis method called thematic analysis. And then I will share some of my own personal experiences with you at the end. So first, what is qualitative research? When we're thinking about qualitative research, that like the qual or qualit piece of that, we tend to be describing the qualities of something. So where quantitative research tends to focus on numbers, you're finding and comparing means, you're plotting things. Qualitative research focuses on describing phenomena, whether this might be participants' experiences, their perceptions, describing a historical event. You're describing the qualities of something in some way. And usually this is done through words. It's probably, if you've talked about qualitative research in the past, it's probably the thing that you are most familiar with is like interviews or focus groups. But we can also use pictures for qualitative research. There's a really cool technique called photo voice, which I will not fangirl over. It's like, I've always wanted to do a project on it, but I have never had the choice, but I do use it in my Psych of Women class. Super cool. You might also use observations as well. So if you're doing like child research, for example, and you are observing children at play, you know, with their consent and parental consent, observations can also be included in qualitative research as well. So it's a very broad term, but generally we're focused on describing something. And people might use words like richer data to describe qualitative work. It just gives you a slightly different perspective on what participants are experiencing than quantitative research does. So there's a number of different types of qualitative research. I have described just a few here, and I'm kind of describing these types as like grounding principles of qualitative research. Some people see these as like theoretical grounding. Some people just see these as like it is a type of research with a specific design itself. There's a lot of ambiguity in qualitative work, which can be a little weird sometimes. But there are a number of different types of research that you might do. So here are some examples of them. Phenomenology would be a type of qualitative research focused on participants' experiences. So you're describing their experiences with something, their perceptions of something. And when I talk about my experiences leading a large qualitative research coding project last fall, I'm going to be talking a bit, we grounded our research in phenomenology. We were looking at participants' experiences and their perceptions of a potential menthol ban. Grounded theory, this is a qualitative method done, it's very lengthy, and it's done to generate theory. So it's a series of steps that you take to generate theory from your qualitative data. Ethnography would be broadly a study of a specific place, a specific culture, traditions of a group of people. Case study being, you know, a study of one or two people. Historical models, looking at history, it's exactly what it sounds like. Looking at patterns in history and like taking notes and kind of like analyzing events in history. And then a narrative model is pretty interesting. You're basically like collecting a lot of data about an event, a person, a phenomenon, and you're kind of like telling your own story about it. Again, not really stuff that I use, but it's stuff that's out there. I'm going to be more focused on phenomenology just with my lines of research. It's just a little bit more applicable. So you have these guiding principles or theories, however you want to call them, but there are a lot of different ways that we can actually collect qualitative data. So the procedures that you go through to get the qualitative data. And again, interviews and focus groups are possibly the ones that you're a little bit more familiar with. Sometimes if you're doing online research, you'll have participants like type in like short answer, like kind of fill in the blank questions. That's a form of qualitative data that I've done a good bit of analysis on. Not always the best quality data, but data nonetheless. Observations again, photos, photo voice videos, whether this is a researcher taking photos and videos of a specific location, or whether you're having participants take videos and photos of a specific place or location. Again, I love the idea of having participants take photos of something. You give them a prompt, they take photos, and then you analyze those photos and like generate some themes or generate like common data out of that. Love the idea of that. And then archival research or document analysis, particularly for like historians. They go into archives and historical materials and they'll analyze those. And this is just some of the ways that you can collect your qualitative data. There are plenty of ways that I have not listed that might not fit into one of these little boxes. So I might use some words throughout this presentation. I might talk about a code book and I might talk about coding. It's kind of just, again, to put us all on the same level playing field. When I talk about a code book, when I say the word code book, this is basically just a guide, usually like a Word document or something, where it lists generally common themes or if you're doing thematic analysis, which is what I'm going to be talking about, or kind of what you're looking for in your data and kind of describes it a little bit so that when people are going through and doing coding, which is the process of looking at the data, organizing it, and kind of splitting it into either different themes or analyzing it in some way. The code book is kind of what people follow. So in terms of thematic analysis, which I'll be talking about next, when I have a code book, it contains a list of the themes that we're looking for, which are just very common threads across participants, and then a description of that. It helps when people are going through and doing coding. So they're reading interviews, for example, they're reading the participants' words, and they're trying to decide, what is this participant saying and what theme does it fit in? So the code book helps them to do that. Coding is the process by which they get there. And I won't talk too much about the actual like process of coding and using in vivo or another qualitative software. That's an entirely different talk for another day. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about something called thematic analysis. What it is, what it isn't. A lot of times people think that thematic analysis is just one approach to looking at a set of data. But thematic analysis really is a series of approaches. As we'll see, there are different types of thematic analysis. And depending on which type you're doing, the guidelines for it are can be pretty non-existent. And the guidelines for what makes, I'll put this in quotes, but like good thematic analysis it's not really agreed upon. I think that's one of my biggest struggles studying qualitative research and this method in particular is that, I mean, I had a great qualitative research class with Dr. Kinser at the School of Nursing here, and got a really solid foundation in all qualitative approaches. But when it comes to specific methods, specific ways of looking at your data, those are kind of few and far between. So you really have to seek those out yourself. So it's kind of difficult to define a lot of terms in qualitative research, including thematic analysis. And I tend to follow these two people, Braun and Clark, who are kind of like the people for thematic analysis. I'm kind of like a student of theirs, so I tend to kind of follow their thinking on thematic analysis. So that's where I'm getting a lot of this information is from my readings of them. So thematic analysis, I generally view it as a way of analyzing my qualitative data, but you know, as with quantitative research, as with other forms of qualitative research, your data analysis method should inform your research design. So thematic analysis can also be considered a guide for your research design. So it helps you to plan out whether you're doing interviews, focus groups, what types of questions you're asking, if you have any prompts included in those, and so on. So it helps to guide your research design, and it helps you to analyze your qualitative data. So it's kind of like how we're doing the codes. But one thing, regardless of what form of thematic analysis you are using, the common aim of this series of approaches is to develop common themes from your data. So you're trying to look for what is consistent across participants, what are common things that your participants are saying or are documenting in their photos, or common themes that are coming up in your reading of documents from the War of 1812 or whatever. So you're looking to develop these common themes, these common threads that weave across. And this ultimately, ideally, gives you a picture of what a number of people are experiencing. Not always the most generalizable, but that's not always the aim either. So what can you use thematic analysis? So I just did a quick search. I cannot tell you anything about like the types of thematic analysis used, but specifically related to prenatal care, parenting with opioid use disorder. I just did a quick like PubMed search of different terms and thematic analysis, and it is a method that seems to be very widely used when it comes to doing qualitative research, whether it's interviews, focus groups, coding people's like short answer, fill in the blanks from surveys. This is a method that people really like. Comes up quite a bit. So there's a lot that thematic analysis can be used for, as long as you are focusing on I mean, anything really. I don't think it's method limited or purpose limited. Yes, so I have pregnant women's knowledge and awareness of nutrition, examining children's experiences of parents with opioid use disorder, sexual and reproductive health risk behaviors, and students' perceptions of risk behaviors, experiences of giving birth during COVID. Yeah, it can be used for a lot of different things. Okay, so here's a little activity. I want you all to pretend, we're going to detour for a minute, and it's related. Pretend you're a home decor retailer. You can be Target, you can be, I don't know, a little place. Pretend you're a home decor retailer and you have all of these products. All right. What ways can you kind of combine these items into categories? What are some ways? Function. So say a little bit more about function. What are the different functions? What might they be?
So like organizing versus like furniture to sit on, just like their purpose, I guess, what purpose they serve in the house.
Yeah, so you can organize it. So there's organizational items, there's furniture items. Yeah, are there other ways that might be like a way that a lot of people thought of too? Are there any other ways you can think of that you can categorize these things?
You could do like according to style, so like stylistic decor versus like contemporary versus traditional.
Yeah, you can totally break stuff down into style. That's a great one. Yeah, I know I should have put more like chairs and other things on there. So even within some of those like functional descriptors, right, you can break stuff down into it's furniture, but it's a couch versus a chair versus a table. Yeah, so it's not a perfect metaphor, but looking at all of these pictures and kind of coming up with what is in common across them, you just did thematic analysis. Again, it's not a perfect metaphor, but it's something I think of whenever I'm like on the Target homepage, and I definitely like snipped pictures from Target on here. Just to be fair, I'm like, oh yeah, they have all the different categories, and you have to kind of figure out what fits where and what has what in common. Yeah, that's ultimately the goal of thematic analysis, is to kind of fit stuff into different groups based on what they have in common. Okay, so again, thematic analysis is often described as just one approach. And these 6 steps are from those 2 people, Braun and Clark, who I'm going to keep talking about because they're kind of like the go-to people for thematic analysis. When you look up anything about thematic analysis, and even on Braun and Clark's own webpage, these are kind of like the 6 basic steps to thematic analysis. I think they can describe a lot of different types of analysis that isn't just thematic analysis, but that's kind of one of the issues with it, where you're familiarizing yourself with the data set. So this generally looks like when I do things, either reading through interviews, reading through focus group transcripts, reading through a document of things that participants have written. So reading through the data set again and again and again, familiarizing yourself with it. One of the articles that actually the Ho et al. Article I've cited here, they talk about living in the data set, which if that works for you to think about familiarizing yourself with the data set, you're living in the data set. Then after you have familiarized yourself with the data set enough, you're going to move on to coding. Generally, this is done in very broad practice. You have that code book with the descriptions of the themes, and you go through this process of reading through everything or looking at everything and kind of organizing it into its buckets. Is it furniture? Is it organizational? Is it wall decor? What is it? Then you're going to, from that, maybe generate more initial themes. So this is an iterative process where you're going through and reading, doing a little bit of coding, coming up with more themes, reviewing the themes, and kind of going back around. So it's not just intended to be 6 steps done in order. It's intended to be an iterative process, right? Yes, I have a dog next to me. So it's intended to be an iterative process where you're not just doing this once, you're going back, and I'll show you when I talk about my experiences at the end. I think we did 3 different iterations of coding things, revising things, and kind of going back around on it. So it's not intended to just be a one-time deal. Refining things, giving themes final names for a write-up, and then writing it up. Because sometimes you'll generate initial themes, and then the more you look at your data, the more you study it, and the more you code things, your themes will probably change. So you can be refining and renaming your themes up until the minute you submit a manuscript for publication. So yeah, it's very iterative. But I do want to caution folks that doing like true thematic analysis, as Braun and Clark say, or their version, which is going to be called reflexive thematic analysis, is a lot more complicated than this, and involves a lot more reflection on what you're reading about, on your themes, on your own biases, your own positionality in regards to the data. And in a lot of ways, like reflexive thematic analysis or their true thematic analysis really embraces subjectivity, which I'll talk about in a second. But it's kind of part of the process where you're like, I'm not objective in terms of this data. And if I really do want to live in the data, then I need to kind of figure out like how I might be biased or how my experiences might be impacting how I'm viewing this data and how I'm coding this data. So it's a lot more complicated than that. And again, there's not like, this is kind of as good as a guess as far as the guidelines for thematic analysis are. Braun and Clark also have, and I have it pasted a couple slides in, like guidelines for publishing this, and guidelines for things that reviewers might want to see if you're trying to publish a manuscript, to kind of show them that you actually are doing rigorous science. Because one of the kind of biggest criticisms of Braun and Clark's true reflective thematic analysis is that it's not rigorous because it is embracing subjectivity. But we also, our quantitative analyses are never objective. So Anyways, that is a whole separate issue that I could go on about. But I have a couple of recommendations here. Braun and Clark kind of write out their process to actually doing thematic analysis. And then there's this Ho et al. Article, which was incredibly philosophical. I cannot overstate how philosophical this was, particularly if you don't know a ton about qualitative research. But the whole point of the article is literally the first author on the paper, like going step by step through how they came to familiarize themselves with the data and how they came to like live in the data. And it was like them reflecting on how their experiences as a child being like raised by their parents impacted their perceptions of like care nurses in Thailand or something like that. And it's a great read if you're thinking about it as a story, but there's a lot of philosophiit's stuff. It was definitely a difficult read for sure. But it is a really nice kind of reflection on actually doing thematic analysis. So yeah, it's an article I'll always remember, whether that's good or bad. I'm going to go with good. Okay, so we can talk about the different types of thematic analysis, and I'm sure that there are more that people can list depending on who you read. But these are the three that Braun and Clark kind of outline in a number of their articles. And the reason they've had to split thematic analysis into at least three forms of thematic analysis and not just like their own version is because they have an original article. And that's kind of what got me really interested in doing thematic analysis is they have this original article and it's miscited. It's miscited a lot to the point where they have published other articles kind of trying to backtrack and say what they actually mean and trying to clarify what they mean by thematic analysis as opposed to other people. And so I read the article where they were like, that's not really what we meant and everybody is misinterpreting us. And I was like, oh, so what actually is this? So that kind of got me thinking about this. And of course, there's probably more versions of thematic analysis than just this, but these are the three that they outline in more recent papers. And they sometimes like will put true thematic analysis in quotes, and we'll talk about their version, which is reflexive thematic analysis. But I do want to make it known, like no version is necessarily better than the others or worse than the others. Just like different maybe quantitative approaches to analyzing data, there might be strengths of each and it might depend on the purpose. So I do want to make that known that like they would never say that like their way is the best way. It just depends on your purpose. So the first one is one that I think a lot of researchers are doing when they're publishing thematic analysis, which is called coding reliability thematic analysis. This is one that I have done in the past. The example that I will be talking about at the end is probably coding reliability thematic analysis. And this is a type of thematic analysis where, as the name implies, relies really heavily on coding reliability. So for those of you unfamiliar with what coding reliability is, reliability is a measure of agreement. So usually when you go through a coding process, you will have pairs of coders. So I might be coding with Mary, who's my research assistant at the Behavioral Health Research Lab. So Mary and I might be a coding pair. And Mary would code the data on their own. I would code the data on my own, and then we would come back together and talk about how we coded, what we found the same, what we found different. And then I would take our transcripts, our coded transcripts, and I would do quantitative analysis on them, which is one of Braun and Clark's big kind of concerns about this is that it's too focused on the quantitative piece. But the goal of that quantitative piece is to generate a number that tells you how much people agree, basically. So do we have a 95% match? Do we have an 80% match? And there's all of these different guidelines that are telling you, like, you want to have at least 90% agreement. You want to have 80% agreement on it. Yeah, and so it's more focused on getting people to actually agree and getting people to be very rigid about their definitions of the themes than it is about actually looking at the data. So yeah, which is, again, it's one of Braun and Clark's main critiques of this type of analysis. Unfortunately, this is, at least in my experience, this type of thematic analysis is something that journals really want, because of the use of reliability. When you show numbers, when you show that there is 95% agreement between your coders or whatever high number, that is taken as a sign that your research is rigorous. And it's taken as a sign that this is good science and these are good codes and these are true codes, which in my experience is not true. What coding reliability, and again, this is not saying that it's bad, there's a time and a place, and I will always include reliability in my manuscripts because editors love to see it. What this encourages is I sit down with Mary and we try to talk about our codes together. And I'm like, well, I didn't code that as theme 1, I coded that as theme 2. And I didn't code that one at all. And so what that encourages is me looking at Mary's and coding the same thing without thinking about it, so that we get as high agreement as possible. So we're not truly coding our data, if that makes sense. I'm copying off of Mary, basically. And that was a problem that I ran into with the project that I'm going to talk about at the end of this. But yeah, so coding reliability it's not bad by any means, but it does have its limitations as far as doing truly reflexive thematic analysis, if that is the goal. If that's not the goal, go ahead and use it. There is also on the other end of that, reflexive thematic analysis. So I should put that in contrast to it. This is a form of thematic analysis that kind of throws that coding reliability out the window. That is not the focus. That doesn't matter. I like to say that this is a form of thematic analysis that really embraces subjectivity. This is something that embraces that the themes and the coding of lines of interview code, for example, or focus group transcripts, coding of these things into themes it's inherently subjective. It is affected by the researchers' identities, by their biases, by their past experiences, by their theoretical orientation and the experience that they've had as researchers. So it's kind of like embracing that and being like, you cannot separate yourself from your work. So that is, it really leans into that. It also it feels like it requires a lot more work to me. Again, this is something that I'm just learning about and something that I'm striving to do, but I don't think I've actually done it. Like, I'm not here to give you a masterclass in reflexive thematic analysis, honestly, because it's such a time-consuming process to truly become super familiar with your data and continue to do the coding and then refining your code book and then recoding and then refining your code book. And it's like, at what point does this end? It seems like a really massive undertaking to me. And Braun and Clark kind of posited that way as well, which I think is why a lot of people might avoid it. Because we got deadlines. We have to get papers out. We have to get presentations out. We don't have a ton of time to be sitting in our data. So that it makes it a little bit more difficult, but definitely worth it. And yeah, a lot of the papers I've read that have truly used this are really cool. And then the third type that they talk about is this codebook thematic analysis, which is kind of a mix of the two, where you might have structured coding that uses a dedicated codebook that was created before you're actually coding, but you rely a little bit less on reliability. So it's kind of a mix of the two. And right now I'm like, I might try that. We can try that. Just kind of on my way to doing maybe more reflexive thematic analysis in the future. While I'm thinking about reflexive thematic analysis and subjectivity and kind of leaning into that, I do want to just talk briefly about using statements like the themes emerged from the data. This is such I am guilty of this, like there's something wrong, but nothing wrong with it. I have definitely used this in some of my writing on qualitative data, but you'll often read this in qualitative papers that have used thematic analysis, they might say something like 4 themes emerged from the data. This is so common. This is so widespread language that is considered like what you should say for qualitative research. And again, I submitted a paper last year where I used this. But so what Braun and Clark say, again, to kind of invoke them, is that themes do not passively emerge from data. And I think this is true whether you are looking at reflexive thematic analysis, where you're leaning into subjectivity, or that coding reliability thematic analysis, where you're more focused on agreement between coders. Regardless of what type you're doing, using like themes emerged puts some more passive spin on it. The themes did not emerge from the data. These were actively created by researchers. While that might not, that kind of sounds like it's not getting at a truth. I mean, when I make a code book, these are themes that are generated by me and my colleagues. So I'm in the process of making a code book right now. And this is not like, I'm reading through the data and I'm seeing common themes, but everything about how my code book is being constructed is up to me, is up to Mary, is up to Caroline Cobb and Andrew Barnes, who are all making the code book. We are the ones who are selecting what the themes are. We are the ones who are writing them. We are the ones who are creating the descriptions that go in the code book. So it's a much more active process. We will be the ones who ultimately, when we get to the point where our research assistants are coding this, we're going to be the ones who are editing the code book. So it's not just like this passive process where like the themes are coming to us in a dream. We are actively generating the themes. And again, it's not to say that this is necessarily like bad language. I'll never say that. It's more accurate to say that themes were generated, that themes were created, because it does kind of acknowledge that this is an active process. But yeah, themes were identified is good as well. Yeah, I have a list of like I'm like a Braun and Clark disciple. I have like a list of things. I should like tack it to my wall where they're like, I think the themes were identified, just something that is giving the sense of like, this isn't just a passive process. But again, like just saying that themes emerged, like I don't think that a journal editor is going to be like, oh, automatic reject because they use that. I don't think that's going to be the case. But just to kind of have you thinking about like the passive process versus active process. But yeah, so doing thematic analysis is hard. And even as I'm talking about it, I'm like, wow, I have so much left to learn about doing qualitative research in general and doing this specific method. Yeah, and so I kind of alluded to this earlier. You can take classes in qualitative methods. Again, I took a great one where I learned about all different types of grounding principles and grounding theories from Dr. Kinser. And it was a great experience for me. But specific methods, specific ways of analyzing data, such as thematic analysis, are not very widely taught in graduate programs of any kind, any programs. Generally, you have to seek out these opportunities yourself. So I did enroll in a thematic analysis workshop with Braun and Clark. It was canceled, but I enrolled in it. I sought it out, enrolled in it. I found it on Twitter, so don't discount Twitter for stuff like that. But yeah, so it's often hard to just get training in qualitative research in general, and beyond that, specific methods. So it's really, really hard. So like that's kind of why I'm here, and I'm like, I'm not an expert in this, but I kind of want to tell you about it, because I didn't know anything about this, and I certainly didn't leave my qualitative research class feeling like, wow, I'm an expert in doing all of the things. So just having some awareness of it is often the first step, right? Another thing, again, I've already talked about this, journals want metrics like reliability. So if you are somebody who's like, that reflexive thematic analysis sounds really great, I would love to lean into subjectivity. It's often really hard to do things that way or to present things in that way, because journals are often going to want metrics like reliability. Science very generally is very quantitative focused. And I don't know about y'all, but at least we're in my training, there's a lot of hate for qualitative research at times, just because it's considered to be less objective. And the numbers don't lie, but people's words might. So it can be kind of difficult to even just begin this. And if you do any sort of qualitative research, not just something that uses thematic analysis, but any qualitative research, it can often be a little bit harder to get some of that published, or to get people to take it more seriously, or to get people to think that you're doing rigorous science. Because people like numbers. People like numbers. People hate any hint of subjectivity in data. That's true for qualitative research, and that's true for quantitative work as well. And I will not lead a whole discussion about how numbers are not objective either, but data can be manipulated. Yep. I also hate this bias as somebody who just is really fascinated by qualitative research and reading about people's words. It's very frustrating. I think people are starting to feel a little bit more positively towards qualitative work in any format. But yeah, just I was always taught in my master's program that it was not as good as quantitative research. People actually outright said this to me, didn't they? Yes, I know it's past dinner time. He's like, it's dinner time. So again, the steps for doing thematic analysis are not well defined. They have that basic list of 6 steps, but the actual process is much more involved in that. And it leads a lot of people to miscite the Braun and Clark 2006 article that I talked about earlier, where people are like, Braun and Clark said to do this. And they had to kind of walk that back and be like, no, we didn't. So it is not well defined. And I think part of that is a general difficulty in finding education around it, difficulty in leaning into the subjectivity of it, a whole bunch of things. And then again, that the concerns about rigor and quality standards, which it should in theory be on the next page. Don't try to read all of this. I can send the article if you're interested in this. Braun and Clark actually were like, oh yeah, people don't think this can be seen as rigorous research. Well, here's 20 steps that we can give to you to kind of guide your research quality assessment. So again, don't try to read them all. I can't list them all. But there are ways to make qualitative research and research that uses thematic analysis specifically, even without reliability, even without including agreement between folks, which I don't actually think is in here anywhere. There are ways to make this rigorous. There are ways to make it seem like you have done your due diligence with research. You have tried your best to remove a ton of bias out of it. You're not giving them cooked data, any of that. Yeah. Ooh, I will take a look at that in a second. Me trying to manage the chat here. Yeah, I will take a look at that later. I love that. So here are some steps. And again, I can send this article out. And there's a couple of other articles as well that are kind of guides for reviewers, guides for editors, guides for authors, where they talk about doing rigorous qualitative research. So I just wanted to throw this here to show to you that people have thought through this. Okay. So I want to wrap it up by talking about myself, and talking about some lessons that I learned from the RVA Heat project, which I actually think Gus came and talked to y'all about. Did Gus talk about this? Okay. Yeah, I was like, y'all are talking about Gus. Yeah, I work with Gus now. We're on a few papers together. I love Gus. But yeah, so I was asked to help lead the qualitative coding for this study called RVA Heat. And it's a much larger data set. There were 213 people who participated in the final sample, completed an online survey. And then from those 213 people, we pulled 31 folks for semi-structured interviews. The interviews were 20-ish minutes or so, and included questions like, what would you do if menthol was banned? What do you think other people would do if menthol was banned? And so the purpose of this study, which we did, I don't know if the paper's actually been moved to like in press yet, but we like essentially got it accepted with some revisions. So we did actually get some of this stuff published, right? So it ended up being a mixed method paper, and we were looking at understanding Black and African American menthol users' perceptions of and reactions to proposed menthol bans. So that was the purpose. So, you know, Braun and Clark have that 6-step model. This is at least 14. I tried to write out as best as I can my kind of like coding process, being the person who came up with the timeline, who had to train the RAs how to do the qualitative coding. I was involved in creation of the initial code book. So this was kind of like my baby. And again, this is not a study on how to do like good reflexive thematic analysis. This probably isn't even a study on how to do good coding reliability analysis. This was the largest scale qualitative project that I have run. I had 3 teams of coders that worked under me. And the absolute worst part about this was we started coding it like the middle of October, and we had a manuscript deadline of December 1st. Yeah, that was my biggest challenge. That was my biggest takeaway, was do not start qualitative coding less than 2 months before your manuscript is due. Biggest takeaway from that. But, you know, just to give you a sense of what I did throughout the process, the number of steps that actually go into any kind of thematic analysis, not just like reflexive. And I would imagine that if I was doing like true reflexive thematic analysis where I was living in my data, I would probably be going through this a lot. But yeah, so this comes out to be at least 14 steps. And this was like a very like rigid process. So it is a lot of work. And I'm sure those of you who have done the qualitative coding and work know it's a lot of work. So I won't go into all of these. Yeah, we had 3 iterations of coding, running reliabilities, recoding, tweaking the code book in there. We had 3 iterations of that, and the only reason we didn't have more was because of our deadline. So yeah, it's a pretty intensive process. But, you know, I want to highlight some successes and challenges that I had with this for those of you who are doing qualitative work now or might in the future. Cannot understate, I did have an awesome team for it. Yeah, we had some troopers who were willing to turn stuff around in like a week, even though they have full-time jobs. So shout out to them. Won't name them, but shout out to them. They did a really awesome job just actually getting the stuff together. So who you choose as your coders, who you have as your coders, how you train them is really important. You want people who can acknowledge their biases and can kind of lean into that subjectivity, even if that isn't wholly the purpose. And also like aren't afraid to make choices, because some people, you know, will start coding and they'll be like, I don't know where all of these things go, and they're kind of afraid to make a choice. They don't want to choose wrong. There is no choosing wrong. That's the whole point. There is no choosing wrong. So yeah, shout out to my awesome team. They were great. Having a solid plan for executing all of the coding and kind of like planning out when we needed stuff, that was a success. I followed a very similar process to executing my coding this time around. I'm currently leading a very similar project as part of my postdoc training. And then delegation and defined roles. Yeah, making sure that I delegated like who was doing what coding, who was doing what, when I was supposed to be running reliabilities. That definitely was a success on the part of Dr. Cobb, who oversaw this project, but also myself and my team. So definitely some challenges. Definitely the very short timeline. That was just not good. That was not fun. I don't recommend trying to do a whole coding project in like 2 months. No, 0 out of 10. Wouldn't do it again. So yeah, so I have now in my current project, I think I've given us 6 months to do it and not 2 months. But we might extend that further into the fall, just because that was such a short timeline and people were stressed. And I want people to actually focus on familiarizing themselves with the data and taking the time to kind of code things to themes. Yeah. I think a lack of clarity. So there's a lot of prep work that goes into qualitative work that you wouldn't even think about. And some of this was like, I had to train my coders this week, so this is kind of fresh in my mind. But like thinking about like where to save files, how to save files, like how to, if you have like 3 different in vivo files, in vivo being a coding software, like how to denote to me what the most recent file is, so that I don't get confused when I go in to show it. Like, yeah, there were just details that I had never thought about that came up this time around. And then, of course, a lack of knowledge about doing this true thematic analysis. Doing this project, I loved doing it. It was a great learning experience, but I came out of it and I was like, yeah, I don't actually know what I'm doing. So I wanted to learn more, hence my postdoc, and hence this presentation, basically. I know I am running out of time, so just some general considerations for coding. This is completely independent of thematic analysis, but this was in my training earlier this week. And just some stuff if you are looking into running a qualitative project, doing coding, having coders, always keeping your research question in mind. Sometimes people kind of lose focus of the big picture. So having a research question in mind, tell your coders what they're looking for. That might help them to make decisions about specific themes. If they're not aware of the overall purpose, they're not going to be able to code as well. Don't keep them in the dark. Don't aim to reach 100% agreement between coders. I would love it if we cut coding agreement together, but people aren't going to let me do that. So don't aim to reach 100% agreement. Some people will tell you you need like 90%. I wouldn't focus on it too much. Now, if it's at like 15%, there's probably something wrong. I would let agreement numbers kind of guide you to figure out, do you need to tweak your code book? Do you need to tweak your coders? Like, what needs to happen there? Don't try to reach 100%. Trying to eliminate your interpretation of what you think participants are saying or what participants mean, while simultaneously realizing that your interpretation can never be fully removed. That's fun to do. That is just so easy to do, is to just completely try to remove yourself, but also remain in yourself while you're coding. So easy to do, but it is important to try. Remembering your own position and identities. Yes. Compared to participants. So just as a quick example, I coded a data set a couple of years ago now on Black mothers who had a perinatal loss. And I had to keep in mind throughout it, first of all, surprise, I'm not Black. And I am also not a mother, and I have no plans to be ever. I will never be pregnant. I will never have the opportunity for a perinatal loss. And so keeping those identities and those facets of myself in my mind as I'm coding kind of help me to kind of like lean into that subjectivity a little bit. Keeping notes in a journal. I actually don't make my coders do this, at least not at this time, but just like keeping notes, depending on what the project is, you might have some reactions to the data. Some people like to include this stuff in their qualitative analysis. Again, I don't. But it is always kind of worth noting, if you're having like really strong reactions to what you're reading, might be nice to jot it down, because that's something that might impact your coding. Not everything has to be coded. That should go without saying. Sometimes a participant says something, it doesn't fit into your codes, but also a thing can be 2 things. So a participant might say something that can fit into multiple codes, and that's okay too. Anyways, here's my dog. You can direct questions to him. I also have the other one in real life right here asking for dinner. So yeah, we'll meet soon. Anyways, thank you for having me. I know we're over time, but I will take any questions, comments, concerns. Yes, I can absolutely share. Leah, can I send the slides to you and you can share with everyone, and I'll share a couple of the Braun and Clark articles as well. Whichever ones I've mentioned throughout, I'll share. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much, Alison. This was great. And Michelle's the one who just put that in the chat, because your talk is so timely, because she actually was you, or it still is, on a big qualitative study that we have going on with the SORT project. And so we've had a lot of this learning with thematic analysis. I know we're at time, but I just have one question that what we ran into, and Michelle can talk more about this, but we tried hard, especially with our patients who just their experiences in recovery and addiction, et cetera, are just so rich. And none of us have that identity. We tried really hard to go more towards that subjectivity end of things. And what we ran into, and Michelle can tell you more, is that our code book was excessive. It was so big because we wanted to stay true to the participants' words.
Yep.
But it just was impossible to work with. And so poor Michelle had to take this massive code book and try to dwindle it down after 20 million revisions, like the way that you just described in your project. And so we've been the two of us talked about like, well, for next time, maybe what are some, I don't know if you had any tips on how to prevent that from happening.
So that happens every single time I try to code anything ever. I think we had like, oh, sorry, buddy. I think we had like 15 or 16 themes that came out of the Black mothers who had experienced perinatal loss data set. We managed to get to, I think, 8 for the RVA heat data set. One thing that I might do is like pick hone the research question to be a little bit more specific. But that's not always possible, so it depends. Yeah, that's a really tough one because there often is so much that pops up. And you want to kind of, I mean, I guess domain summaries are okay. Domain summaries compared to themes, where domain summaries are like benefits of X, challenges of X, not really descriptive. It's not really describing their experiences, but like putting things into these domain summaries can help. Braun and Clark would be like, no domain summaries, but like sometimes you have to do it. Yeah, sometimes holding the research question can help with that, making it more specific. Honestly, sometimes picking and choosing, which is terrible to say. Yeah, I have found it very hard to not inflate my code book with a lot of themes. Yeah, especially when there's a lot of stuff being said. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but
no, that's super helpful. And I think it's more validating than anything. Like when we started, I think the first iteration had like 130 codes, and we were like, that is not sustainable. But in trying to collect some of them or combine them, it was definitely a thing of like, okay, so what are we losing, I guess, by collapsing that, and is that like benefit worth it? So I think yeah, I really like the idea of like honing the research question, the idea of domains. We ended up with like sub themes, and I think that kind of, but yeah, this is super helpful.
Yeah, something. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer. Maybe ask me that question again after I've gone through my current process. Yeah, I'm doing a project right now where I think we're going to end up with a lot of themes out of our data. But I did a brief abstract before we begin coding where like I went through like a pseudo coding process. I came up with 5, and that was like amazing. And to like be perfectly honest, we cut stuff. I originally had like 8 themes that I wanted to include in this abstract, and I sat down with Caroline and we cut stuff. Yeah, so like I don't know that that's like bad science or whatever, but like yeah, we cut stuff. We were like, what has the least number of common threads? What is the least interesting to us? What's the least interesting to policymakers? We cut that. That's probably unethical, but like
No, like Michelle said, I think your talk was very validating because this recent project that Michelle was leading, we ran into all of those challenges that you listed, especially because we were trying to go with a broader topic. So honing the research question could be a piece of advice we could do for next time. And it is hard with these patients because they have just their stories are so rich, and you have that guilt. So thank you so much. Does anyone else have any other questions for Dr. Patev?
Just one quick question. If you have any good resources about in vivo, I would love them. In vivo is kind of a bear sometimes. So
I do in vivo trainings. I have been using in vivo for a while. I do in vivo trainings. I can send you my very brief PowerPoint, but it's also very limited because it was made for essentially my undergrad RAs who had to code something very quickly, and it was very simple, like interview coding. So I can help you out. I can send you my materials. I should really start like consulting on that. That should be a thing I do. But yeah, I can definitely help you out with that.
Thank you.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, I apologize for going over.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was excellent and really, really helpful and actually so timely given this project that we have going on too, and some more projects that we have in the pipeline. So thank you again, Dr. Patev, and thank you everyone for joining us for our lab meeting. Sorry we went over a few minutes, but we'll see everyone next month. Thank you for joining.
Awesome. Thank you.